Some people have little to no interest in politics, and sometimes they tend to zone out whenever they come up in conversation because it causes conflicts and disagreements, and sometimes they're unpleasant. But I'm here to tell you that you don't have to like politics, but it's really important for you to know what's happening in your country. According to Ben Shapiro, a lawyer and political commentator, stated, 1 in 3 young Americans support full-scale socialism, and 50% of all Democratic voters say they favored socialism over capitalism. The reason for this is because most people are not informed properly, or they get their sources from fake news or hear banter on the streets. Making socialism our primary form of government is problematic for several reasons. First, socialism diminishes people's will to work. Second, the U.S. has attempted some semi-socialist projects in the past, and they have all ended poorly. And third, socialism has failed tremendously in other countries. The first problem with socialism is it takes away our value of things and our desire to work for a greater life purpose. If you're handed things, you tend not to value them as much as if you were to work for it. You would take ownership over it more. When I was 13 and the iPods started coming out, I begged my parents for an iPod Touch, and they were like, we just don't have the money for it. You're just gonna have to earn it yourself. And so I was like, okay. And I started mowing the lawn and doing housework and trying to make as much money as a 13-year-old could. It took me a few months to tally up the money, but finally I had enough to buy my iPod. When I went to the store and handed in my money and I had that iPod in my hands for the first time, I felt like I accomplished the world. Some people don't have to work as hard for their money, or don't even have to work at all because of government handouts. Richard from a Middle Ground video about socialism and capitalism said, "My father is an alcoholic. Due to his injury in his leg, he receives SSI. And what ended up happening is he receives enough SSI to the point where he is not motivated to do anything else beyond just going home and drinking a beer. I understand that we should help the elderly and the widowed, disabled, and veterans, but there are some people that abuse the government's assistance, even though they don't need it. An even bigger problem for the government enabling people to not have to work is people won't want to better themselves if everything's just handed to them. If people are working their butts off and trying to make a salary and trying to receive a higher pay raise for themselves and their family, this money is taxed and sent to people who aren't working as hard. This brings me to my point, why would you want to work hard if it's just taken away and given to somebody else? My next point is the US has experimented with some semi-socialist projects, and they haven't ended very well. For example, California tried having free college for its residents. But according to Stephen Crayson, an educated journalist, said after years of free tuition, California had to impose tuition and student fees because of the debts that they accumulated. Money has to come from somewhere. It just doesn't appear out of nowhere. Somebody has to pay it, and this comes by increasing the taxes. Last, socialism has failed in other countries. Venezuela used to be a rich, prosperous oil nation. But now, since the people voted in Hugo Chavez, a socialist ruler, it is now one of the poorest countries in the continent, and it has the highest homicide rates in the world. Because of Chavez, in just 20 years, he increased the poverty rate from 29% to 80%. Also, with socialism, it gives all the power to the government. So when people retaliated, the government brutally repressed its people. When the economy crumbled in 2014, the students started to protest, and dozens were killed and hundreds were injured. Once they began to rely on the socialist government, it got way too big, and the people had no freedoms anymore. Though history proves itself over and over again, a lot of leftists believe that it'll still work in America. They believe that the positives will outweigh the negatives. Their first counter-argument is that socialism will provide free school and health care. As I previously stated, free colleges won't work because the money has to come from somewhere. With free schooling, it equals easier access. And when you have easier access, that means more people can go to college. It'll lead to a college degree being the minimum. It possibly will lead to a college degree being the minimum requirement for a job, even if it's not necessary. Next, free healthcare. With socialism, private property doesn't exist. So everything is evenly distributed amongst the people. And it limits medicine because they have to provide for everyone. Drugs aren't available to the average citizen in Cuba, not even aspirin. According to Jeffrey Roberg, a Proclaims journalist, said it was reported in 1995 in Cuba that when individuals checked into the hospital, they must bring their own sheets, toilet paper, soap, and personal items. It's because everything is equal there and everyone has to share everything. Another common argument for socialism is that everyone is equal so that there are no disadvantages. This is accomplished by redistributing the wealth. The rich are taxed even more heavily. Some say that the rich were born wealthy so that they deserve to be taxed more because they didn't earn it. According to Dave Ramsey, a self-made billionaire and published author, said 88% of America's millionaires are first-generation rich. That means 9 out of 10 millionaires started with nothing and made themselves into something. So I'm going to give you guys an example that pertains to us. So pretend you're a hardworking student and you come to class every day and you study for your tests and you work your butt off and you get an A in that class. Then somebody else comes in, one of the other students, and he doesn't come to class very often. He doesn't really study for tests. He isn't really trying, and he just doesn't want to do the work. So he gets a D. The teacher says, well, that's not fair. You have an A and he has a D. So we're just going to combine your guys' grades and make it equal so everybody in the class has a B. That's how socialism works in the real world. They take people with more money and give it to the people with less money so that everyone's equal. It'll make it so that nobody wants to try to succeed, because if people try to succeed and someone tries to take it away from them, that's really discouraging. Overall, socialism takes away determination to better people's lives. It doesn't work in the US or in other countries. In conclusion, socialism is an illogical form of government, and it would be more of a hindrance than a benefit to the American people.